If you aren't a member of the LGBTQ community, your perception of coming out might mean one big announcement that tells the world who you are and what your identity is, one time ever. However, the reality is that sexuality is super fluid and will evolve over time. In my journey, I went from identifying from heterosexual to bisexual to pansexual to now queer. So let's dive right into the story. Hi, my name is Vanessa Raquel. Please make sure to like and subscribe and check out this channel, which is a vlog full of life advice and stories from the perspective of a queer woman of color. So I think in order to tell this story, it's important to add some context of how I grew up and what environment I was in. So as I've mentioned lots of times, I'm a born and bred Torontonian. And if you're unfamiliar with Toronto, Canada, it is a super diverse place and a super queer friendly place. Even from the age of being really small, I was seeing examples of queer couples that were fully grown up, fully married for decades. In fact, I was actually the flower girl at a gay wedding when I was like 8 years old. I often joke that I had to be taught that people were bigoted and hateful towards queer people because my understanding was that they were just one of everybody else, which they are. But yeah, in general, I just wasn't really exposed to a lot of bigotry against queer people. And I would also specifically note, when you're like 4 years old, do you remember how just like all adults are boring and all kids are like super fun? So if you're just meeting some adults that are gay and some adults that are straight, they're just all equally boring because they're not kids. So I think that also contributed to my mentality about gay people was, you know, just as boring as straight people. That should be our new slogan. Gay people, just as boring as straight people. But anyways, growing up when I was super young, I never really thought anything about it. I just assumed I was straight, which there's a terminology on called compulsory heterosexuality, which you should go YouTube and check out if you're interested. It's very interesting. It's basically the concept that everyone assumes they're straight because we live in a very heteronormative world. So for folks like me who are not straight, it resulted in a bit of confusion earlier on in life. But anyways, kind of the moment where I really realized to myself that I was queer, it was an MSN conversation. Aging myself. So MSN is basically just like Messenger, essentially. But it was like a platform. It was like the only social media we really had back then. So, you know, you would have like your statuses with all cute little things, whatever. Anyways, I was on MSN chatting with somebody. To summarize the situation, I was chatting with a straight male friend and he was interested in a straight female friend of mine. And I had been like all huffy and puffy about this, being like trying to be protective over my friend, like this is a bad boy, like, ooh, this is a bad idea, blah, 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 blah. And then he just made a comment like, I think that you love her. And I was like, what? And then I started thinking about it. And then I was like, oh, maybe there is a distinguishing factor between like having a friendship relationship with a girl and having a crush on a girl. And that made me be like, And then I started going through one of those things where you like run through every moment in your whole life. And then you're like, oh, maybe that one way I was thinking about women was a bit more than a heterosexual woman would have thought of that woman. Or like, maybe I think about those things the way I do in a different way. And I kind of just like put all the pieces together and was like, interesting. I like women. Okay. Kudos to MSN for helping me identify my sexuality. But then I knew right away, like, I was still interested in men. So the natural conclusion at the time was I was bisexual. So I started kind of coming out as bisexual to a few close friends. And I think I've mentioned before, the neighborhood I was in was like very vanilla. Meaning, I don't think there was an openly gay person at the entire high school of like 1,000 kids at the time. So all the friends I was coming out to were all straight and they were all super supportive and no one really cared and everyone thought that was cool. Around the same time, another friend of mine came out as bisexual and then him and I kind of bonded a lot about like being bi and whatnot. And in Toronto, there was this all ages club night thing happening called Homo Hop, which is the greatest name ever. And it was basically like you would go to various bars and clubs and they would host an all ages night where basically alcohol wasn't served. Kind of a weird thing in retrospect, like should have probably been like ages 21 and lower or something instead of all ages, but you know, alas, this is what the world was. Do those still exist? I have no idea. And basically a bunch of my straight friends who were these lovely allies and myself and my bisexual male friend were gonna go to a Homo Hop. And then my bi friend made a comment like to the straight guys that were coming with us and just kind of said like, hey, FYI, some people who present as female might actually have male genitalia. And everyone was like, okay, yeah, true, you know, like Homo Hop makes sense. And I remember being really confused. I was like, wait, why does that matter? And And he was like, oh, well, you know, like, I'm bisexual, I'm attracted to men and women, and these are a bunch of straight guys who are attracted to women. So therefore, someone who's female presenting with male genitalia would not fall under our umbrella of attraction. And I was like, really interesting. And I just remember kind of like brain exploding, like, wait, I don't care about all that. That's like way beyond what I care about. And I remember us having like an argument, like, wait, so you're telling me that if you fell in love with someone and then they took off their pants, you'd like decide you didn't love them anymore because of their genitalia? And my brain just like literally could not comprehend like such a world. And really soon around this time, I randomly went to one of these like retreat things. It was basically just a bunch of kids going to this educational camp for a weekend. And it was very focused on like sexuality, gender, stereotypes, etc. And for the first time there, I learned of the word pansexual. And at the time, the distinction between bisexuality and pansexuality was described as bisexual meaning interest in two genders, versus pansexual, pan meaning all, attraction to all genders. So back when, it was pretty cut and dry. If you were interested in men and women, you were bisexual. If you were interested in kind of more than that, or if it was more ambiguous to you, you would identify as pansexual. And I forget if I learned this metaphor at that weekend or if I came up with it or whatever, but the metaphor used for pansexual that I always really like emulated with, when you think about eye color, it's something that you could never not notice, like it's something visual that one can see. However, it would be very unlikely you would say the statement, I won't date X person because of their eye color. And that is very similar to how I think about sexuality. I would never not date someone based on their gender or sex. And that's why I leaned on that definition of pansexuality. So this was all maybe 2010-ish, a decade ago. So old. But as life and society is, things change and terms evolve. Somewhere along the lines, as was 100% wonderful and should have happened, bisexuals kind of reclaimed the definition of bisexuality to be inclusive to trans folks. Meaning everything I thought I kind of knew about the distinction between bi and pan sort of faded away. And pairing that with, I think 9 times out of 10, when I said the statement, I identify as pansexual, I was met with, what does pansexual mean? So after years of explaining it over and over and over again to people of all ages, all backgrounds, all situations, could have been a relative, could have been a stranger, could have been a colleague, I was just kind of losing a connection with pansexual as an identifier. And I don't know what it is, but bisexual just never really connected with me the way it once did when I was really early in high school. And then along came queer. So obviously queer was hanging around the whole time. I knew of queer, I thought of queer. And queer is mostly just an umbrella term that means not straight. The thing about queer is it's just like, I don't know, it's just, this is hard to articulate. Queer for me is the closest thing to saying I'm gay that still includes men, if that makes sense. Like, I almost strongly do identify with words like lesbian and gay because they're words that you're like, oh, I get it, which to me queer does as well. It's like you would never be confused, like, identity is hard. Okay, I don't know if any of that made sense. I feel like I just rambled a lot that made no coherent sense, but the point of the matter is that queer to me is a word that helps me feel connected to what I mean and helps other people understand what I mean, both in a really quick, succinct word. Also, as I've mentioned before, I have started an organization called Queers, so I think there's maybe a tie-in for that for me as well. I have a really strong affinity for rainbows. I even have like a rainbow tattoo. If you can see, it is dots. Got the 6 dots. Rainbows. Rainbows are cool. There you go. It took a while to focus, but you get the idea. These days, honestly, though, when I think about my sexuality, I don't really mind any of the identifiers, bi, pan, or queer. I'm really happy that the bi community has been extremely explicit about their inclusion of trans people in the last like 5 or so years. I just feel like super cheesily, I just see love. I just see people, I just see love. That's all it really is. Hippy dippy time, you know? And who knows, maybe that identifier is gonna change over time too. There's definitely a myth that like who you're with just signifies what your sexuality is, but that's really erasing someone's identity by saying that, oh, if you're with this one person, that dictates everything. It really doesn't. And for me, the queer community has been like my home and my culture and community for so long. Like, I don't have a religious community group. I don't have like 45 family members that I see every day. Friends obviously are always moving and changing and growing as time evolves. But the queer community, I just know that I can go into a gay bar in any city, in any country, at any time, and I will find people like me. And that's just really lovely. And one other thing I wanted to talk about quickly was actually coming out. So I have like come out to every human in the world by now with genderqueers, but I went through a really interesting journey when I went from university to work. Because in the university space, obviously I'm like sitting there running genderqueers, gay, 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 gay. But then in the work world, I'm sitting there talking about my male partner, and that's it. So all of a sudden everyone was like, oh, you're straight. And I'm like, oh God, no. Not that there's anything wrong with being straight. You're all still beautiful and lovely too. Sorry. It's just like, it's just like if someone was like, oh, you're a cactus. And you're like, what? No, I'm a human. You know, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but you get the idea. Cactus? I don't know. So you realize you really just have to kind of perpetually come out all the time, always, to any new person, ever. Which is why people get things like tattoos or dress certain ways or talk about certain things, because it just gets exhausting to always be like, oh my God, here's this whole thing. And not to mention, every now and again, you run into someone who's super not okay with it. And you're like, oh, cool, that's great. And I think that that's something that is like very obviously unique to the queer community, is like, you run the risk that you just might meet someone who hates you because of who you are the second they find out about who you are. And that's just like a little alarming. Thankfully, the world's getting better. If you're in Toronto, Canada, walking down the street, you're probably gonna be fine. But that's really not the case all over the world. It's actually still legal in many countries to imprison people for being gay or even kill them for being gay. And that's why my feature for this video is the charity Rainbow Railroad. Rainbow Railroad connects refugees from countries where it is legal to do these things, and it helps bring these people to other countries where it is illegal to do these things. It costs $10,000 to save one life, so they are always super, super grateful to have extra donations. I donate to them every single month, and I strongly recommend you consider a one-time or many-month donation as well. So that's my sexuality journey, at least so far. What about you? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to read what you have to say. As a reminder, my name is Vanessa Raquel. Really appreciate you liking and subscribing and coming along the journey of this vlog of life, advice, and stories from the perspective of a queer woman of color. That's me. So I wish you all the best to my gays, gals, and fabulous pals. Mwah! Bye.